Okay, good morning everybody. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. Welcome to the Children's Scrutiny Panel meeting. We'll start with item 1, membership of the committee. My name is Cathal Burke and I chair the Children's Scrutiny Panel. I'll ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Sheikh Ullah.
Morning, I'm Darren O'Donovan. I'm a Dewsbury West councillor.
Morning, Councillor Donna Bellamy.
Good morning, Lisa Holmes.
Good morning, Dale O'Neill, volunteer co-optee.
And if I could ask the officers that are present to introduce themselves and their roles, please. And if we start at the front right, please.
Harpreet Soul, Head of Educational Outcomes.
Emma Brayford, Kirklees Learning Partner, Data and Assessment.
Good morning, Janet Tolley, Virtual School Head Teacher.
Good morning, I'm Elaine McShane, Service Director for Family Support and Child Protection.
Morning, Steve Combe, Head of Corporate Parenting.
Morning, Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Good morning, I'm Martin Green, I'm a Head of Service in Learning and Early Support.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Wheatcroft, Head of Early Support.
Hi, Tracy Bodle, Kirklees Community Hubs Manager.
Councillor Masood Ahmed, Cabinet Member for Schools and Aspiration.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Item 2 of the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. Can members approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of January? They're an accurate account of the meeting that took place. Okay, thank you. Item 3, interest. If any councillors have any interests which they need to declare, if they can fill out the appropriate paperwork and hand it in at the end of the meeting. 4, admission of the public. All items on this agenda take place in public and we have an informal agenda which will take place after this meeting. We have a number of items on the agenda and a limited amount of time, so we've run into a very tight schedule this morning. We move on to item 5, which is the introduction to Mel Meggs, who's the new Director for Children's Services. And Mel would like to introduce herself, the role and priorities for the year.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, I joined Kirklees at the beginning of December, so I'm just about to do 3 months, I think, which has been brilliant. I found some really great things in the department. I come with 34 years of history of working in children's services, so I started life as a nursery nurse and went on to then qualify as a social worker. I worked in a range of different local authorities. I think there are 4 big areas of transformation work that we are going to be embarking on in children's services. The first will be to complete the improvement journey for children's social care, so that we make sure that our most vulnerable children get the best services that we're able to provide. You'll know from the last Ofsted visit that there's been significant progress made, but we need to keep on making that progress. And when Ofsted come back and find us no longer inadequate, it's really important that we keep an eye on improvement, and I'll be looking to work with this committee on what the next stages of improvement look like after Ofsted have returned. I think we're going to need to do some work with our schools around the learning outcomes that are being achieved, and we'll have some discussion about that today, but that I think is a medium-term piece of work we need to do to try and make sure that our children get the best learning outcomes that they can, and I think there's a significant room for us to improve. We want to take our early help offer onto the next level, and we want to make sure that part of that looks at what provision we're putting in place for young people. Where do we go next with our children's centres, and what does our youth offer look like in Kirklees? And I think we need to do some work around that. And then the 4th area will be something that's on the agenda for you today, and will be the next stage for the SEND transformation. So how are we ensuring those children with special educational needs and disabilities are getting the right support at the right time, and make sure that when they move into adulthood that they're able to be as independent as they can be. So those are the four big core areas that we'll be working on together, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, and very welcome. And we look forward to working you in the future. Item 6 is number of children in care. The panel will consider the latest data showing the number of children in care. Steve, thank you.
Yeah, so this is a regular update on the number and age of children in care. You can see when you look at page 12, the numbers of children in care per 10,000 population. In terms of Kirklees, we were at 63 children in care per 10,000 population at the end of December, compared to statistical neighbours. And then the England average, you can see their statistical neighbour group was 86, England average 64. At a previous scrutiny committee meeting, members specifically asked for details that when we mention statistical neighbours, who are these statistical neighbours? So this is Department for Education, socio-economic group, etc. So looking at councils where they think similar to Kirklees. So when we talk about statistical neighbours, on page 12 you can see that list of local authorities there. An elected member in another meeting talked about scale in terms of population. I say it's unrelated to population. It's more about similar socio-economic, etc. Page 13, you can see at the top the data moving forward in terms of our children in care and our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in care. At the end of December, we had 629 children in care and 10 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Going down to the bottom of page 13, you can see the gender breakdown, the largest group being boys 11 to 15, and you can see the other groups there, less than a year old, etc., all within that graph at the bottom of page 13. The top of page 14, this is a graph related to children placed more than 20 miles outside the Kirklees district. Slight increase there in December, but in general the overall pattern for this number over the last 2 years has been decline. I was just checking before this meeting, and back in January 2017 we had 127 of our children in care placed more than 20 miles outside our district. So if you compare that with the end of December, there was 106. So overall, that pattern of the overall pattern is one of decline. However, there was a slight increase there in December compared to November. Other matters we've been asked about previously, so we include a graph, is the ethnicity of our children in care. So you can see that of the bottom of page 14, and then you've got children becoming looked after at the top of 15, and the ethnicity for that month. So that's it for the report, and this is the format we were requested to bring it in, and then periodically we can bring more in-depth reports, but this is your regular update regarding the numbers of children in care.
Thank you for the update. I welcome the additional information on the statistical neighbours and the details around that, and also on the number of children placed outside of Kirklees over 20 miles and more, that we are doing as much as we can where appropriate for those children that can be kept in, that we are working to do as much as we can with that. Do you want to explain a bit more about that, Steve, about what work is taking place?
Yeah, we have a number of work streams looking at this group of children. So we have an external placement panel. We also have legal gateway and permanence panels where we look at the children who are coming into care, where they're going to be placed, and we have a review system over and above the standard review system of children in care. So for some of these children and young people have been in placement for some time. They've got local connections where they're currently living. With the external placement panel, we get updates from the social workers, and if we see that things are not going well, then we start to look at that case and say, well, do we have a more local option, you know, if it's safe to do so, to bring that child or young person closer to home. I am aware in the December figure there's at least 2 young people there who were placed outside the district specifically for safeguarding reasons. We placed them outside the district for that reason. But we will continue with this piece of work of reviewing the cases alongside the standard 6-monthly childcare review and looking to build our local capacity in terms of our fostering capacity locally, and also for some of these children, looking at the potential for reunification. We've just started a piece of work looking at a thing called the NSPCC Reunification Project. This is where we look at a specific project to look at children who may have been in care for some time, who are now older and their family may have moved on. And part of our sufficiency strategy is, one of the starting points is, can children live within their family? Because families change over time. So just because a child's been in care 2 or 3 years doesn't mean they have to stay in care for their whole childhood. And that NSPCC reunification work stream that we're going to start will encourage all practitioners to look at the potential. Have things changed within the family? Can we begin to rebuild some of those connections for these children?
Thank you for the explanation. I think it's important also that we do recognise that there is often a need to place outside of the area for safeguarding and other issues as well. Do we have any questions or comments from the panel?
Yeah, maybe one just for future, Chair, for future meetings of this panel, not this year, maybe for next year. In the funding and commitment that was made at last week's Budget Council include elements of funding to reduce the number of children being placed outside of Kirklees, and also provisions for extra care places. So I don't expect anything now because it was just a week ago but maybe at some point, if I'm here next year, that we get a bit of insight into what those plans might be and how they might play out.
Yeah, we're pulling together a meeting in April to look at a multi-agency meeting to look at some of our existing provision in terms of residential and how we may want that to look in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to item 7 is virtual school. The panel will consider a report providing an update on the role of the virtual school in Kirklees, its statutory responsibilities and some case study examples.
Hi, good morning. I'm not sure how much you do or don't know, so do stop me if I'm starting too basic for you. So it's good that we follow on from Steve, because the young people that we work with are children and young people in care. We currently work with 535 youngsters aged between 3 and 18. We have recently just started to move into the post-16, so we've done a year working with Year 12, and it's our first year working with Year 13. We work with these young people, with their schools and with their social workers and their carers, to focus in on educational achievement and attainment. We do that in a whole variety of ways. If you've had a chance to look through the documentation, we're working to new statutory guidance that came into force from the 1st of September this year. That involves us working with children and young people currently in care. So we have things called PEPs, PEP meetings, PEP processes, where we work with a whole range of professionals to focus on individual young people and how together we might enhance the support and their chances. And often it's about catch-up from things that they've missed in their pre-care experiences. But something that's new from the 1st of September is my responsibility to provide advice and guidance to parents, carers, previously looked after young people. So maybe young people have been adopted or subject to something called special guardianship orders. That advice and guidance might mean we talk about the best choice of school, or what to do if the young person's been excluded, or if a family is struggling to get access to services. But it's not in the same way, it's not directly working with all individual young people in the same way that we do for children and young people currently in care. Something you've probably heard of is, do you want to ask? Sorry, I don't know how it works, do we? Okay, that's fine. Something else that you've probably heard of is something called the Pupil Premium Plus. So it's very confusing, the pupil premium, because everything seems to be called a pupil premium, even though it can be different things. So there's the pupil premium that you're probably very familiar with, that is paid into schools and is around focusing on support for disadvantaged youngsters. There's something called the Pupil Premium Plus that comes directly to me. It's currently £2,300 per pupil in care, and I am responsible for allocating that to support young people. And in Kirklees, the way we do that is through a system called an electronic system, where the professionals together agree what support is needed, put in the request, and I authorise it. So we know exactly how much money is being spent on each young person, and we can review in a timely manner the impact that that's having. Some young people don't need the full 2,300. Some young people need thousands and thousands of support, so it's not that every youngster has that amount of money. The new pupil premium that goes directly into schools for previously looked after children is also £2,300, but that goes directly to the school and not through me. So in terms of my advice and guidance sometimes to adoptive parents, it might be about how can you challenge the school to know that that money is being spent on your young person. Our role really is to work across services with lots and lots of, so obviously the people I've mentioned already, but also around emotional health and wellbeing support. I actually work a lot with children's services in things like the permanence panel, the external placements panel that Steve mentioned, to make sure that education is considered as a central element when any decision is being taken around our children and young people in care. Shall I pause around the guidance and take any questions there? Would that be helpful? Sorry, do I have to click off?
I just wanted to know, when you say we, who is we? Okay, so that's a good question. I'm, as virtual school head, it's a statutory role within a local authority, but I have a team of people who work with me. I have a manager for secondary and post-16 and a manager for early years and primary, and they have working with them a team of achievement coordinators, and also we have a primary teacher and a secondary teacher. I don't know, some of you may remember the ELAC team. The ELAC team has been around for a long time working with young people. They did a lot of direct work with a small number of individual children in care. When the statutory guidance first came out 4 years ago, it was expected that we were more like a school. So it's called a virtual school, but we work like a real school. So we get all the attainment and progress information about our youngsters as though they were in one school every term, and we look at that data and see where we might need to target higher levels of support in terms of enabling youngsters or supporting youngsters to try to close the gap or catch up. The reason I asked is that with over 600 children, I wanted to be assured that you do have enough people to support all the social workers with all their children. Do you think you do have?
That's another really good question, and actually the National Association of Virtual School Head Teachers are doing a survey at the moment to see how they're set up across the country and to see what the ratio might be expected to be of a virtual school staff to the number of young people in care. I think that we are currently relatively well resourced. everybody on my team has a cohort of youngsters, but we do have to kind of prioritise who we are more involved with. So, for example, we don't attend every single PEP meeting for every young person with the social worker in the school because we don't have the capacity to do that. But we use information. We do something called, it's hard to say is this, pre-PEP prep. So for every youngster, somebody from my team looks at all the data, and if they're not going to be attending a meeting, ensures that the social worker's fully briefed around the sorts of questions we might be looking to ask, and also about the targets that were previously set and how we judge whether the support that's been put in place there is having impact or not.
Can I just follow on from that and just ask how many people are employed totally within the virtual school area, and what is the maximum number in a cohort that one individual has?
That's a good question. We have 15 people who work in the virtual school, including data analysis and business support, though they are not all full-time. I couldn't tell you the exact full-time equivalent at the moment. The cohorts do vary. In primary, we can have cohorts of 60 to 70 young people. In secondary, the cohorts are slightly smaller. That is because we tend to have a need for greater involvement around things like exclusions, referrals through to alternative provision. So the cohort, we tend to have more what we call intensive cases, actually from year 9 through to 18.
It seems an incredibly large number, 60 to 70 in the primary. Are we able to make a difference? Following on from Dale's question around, are we able to make a difference, a genuine difference? And what value can we add dealing with so many?
Okay, so I think if you look at the case studies, you'll see that we can demonstrate that we're making a difference. It is difficult, I think, to demonstrate change in terms of data in short time scales, because many of these youngsters have, in pre-care, have maybe had a lack of engagement with education or school. Some of the youngsters in primary, some of the early development, the brain development, because of the trauma and life experiences they have had pre-care. So I think we have to, as well as looking at hard data in terms of attainment and progress, we have to look at other softer indicators around how well a youngster is settling, engaging with other services. And I reread the case studies this morning, actually, before I came in. And these have been, I've asked the member of the team to pull me together one case study each. And I think it demonstrates not only our ability to work across services and to use our expertise with social workers to get the right people involved at the right time, but actually to demonstrate how sometimes in relatively short time scales we are able to impact and enable that youngster to start to get on the right trajectory, if you like. Because our main aim is that all of these youngsters post-18 will be in employment, education or training and, go on to be able to support themselves as they move forward into adult life.
Can I just ask specifically maybe more around primary schools? Can I just ask 3 quick questions and then just let you briefly, you can be brief, but it's okay. So are all schools using the funding that's allocated to the pupils every year? Are they using it? Is the criteria of which the school would use the 2,300 the same criteria that you might use to allocate? And what might this money be used for as examples within schools?
Okay, so for your first question, I'm not sure. The 2,300 for the children and people in care comes to me. So I think that where targets are not being set, where we don't think there's enough support going in, then we will contact the school and we will work with them and support them to put something in that I will then sign off. The schools don't get any direct funding for these youngsters. They do for the previously looked after. And yes, that's my role then to challenge, are they spending it appropriately? In terms of what sort of things might it be spent on, The most straightforward, the things I get most requests for, and I know exactly because I sign off every single target and every single PEP, is one-to-one tuition. So frequently it's one-to-one tuition either within the school environment or things like Kit McGrath, that sort of thing. But it's not just that the carer are going to Kit McGrath, it's that the school and the carer and the social worker are identifying exactly what support is needed. We also fund small group support, additional intervention, nurture intervention in schools. We're open to any suggestion because each of these youngsters is an individual, and what works for one youngster in one environment might not somewhere else. So we don't kind of have a tick list of this is all you can choose. We're open to anything as long as we can link it through to educational attainment and progress. It might be around engagement. It might be around rewards for youngsters, particularly some of our youngsters in year 10 and 11 who are maybe becoming a bit disengaged. You know, if you attend this many revision classes, then this is a reward for you. We also commission big projects that school can't on their own. So we have additional staff in our SEND, Special Educational Needs and Disabilities team, specifically to prioritise our youngsters with education, health and care plans, specifically if they move placement, so that we can expedite and work in a timely way to ensure they're placed appropriately. And in the educational psychology service, where we also have some inclusion workers who go and work with schools around individual needs of students, but also provide attachment awareness training free for designated teachers, individuals who work with schools. And we're just about to embark upon something called the Timpson programme, where we train up 10 whole schools in Kirklees around attachment awareness, all staff, because actually, you know, what's good for children and young people in care is good for all of our youngsters. Does that answer all your questions?
With a delay, yeah, but I wanted to say that I'm actually really pleased to hear that, because I'm the parent of a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, and you know, increasingly, some people in this room have heard this from me before, but increasingly over the last few years, what is occurred in the curriculum is putting great pressures on 4, 5, 6-year-olds. It's different, seems to be different from a few years ago. They're doing things now at school that they weren't doing a few years ago. What my daughter was doing in reception year 1, year 2. What my daughter was doing in, say, year 1 and year 2, they're starting some elements of this in reception class. So my little boy struggles with some stuff, and you just know that the ante's been upped. The ante's been upped by government, but the capabilities of 4-year-olds hasn't really changed. 4-year-olds aren't being born with superior behaviour or particular brain power to make them, you know, able to achieve much more quickly. And I think I'm really pleased to hear that what you're describing to me is a really holistic approach to what you're doing, and it's not all about making sure kids know their fractions, their numbers and their blended skills and that kind of thing, because actually before children can achieve a lot of that stuff, there's a lot of behaviour, emotional play, creative play that needs to be achieved first before the brain's even ready to entertain some of that. So yeah, I just want to sort of be on record saying I'm really pleased to hear that it does sound that holistic, because that's always been my hope.
Thank you. Can I just add one other thing I've just thought of while you're speaking? We also fund some additional Tier 2 mental health support through the Choose project, which links in with the placement support team. Because actually, if you imagine for your 4-year-old how it is, imagine how it is with everything else that's happened in some of these young people's lives. So it's about trying to get youngsters ready for learning rather than just trying to focus in on the learning.
We've heard how there's a lot of emphasis on the hopeful process of returning children to their families. And reading through, I found one line on page 32 which says, the choice of education setting should be based on what any good parent would want for their children, obvious. But reading through the rest of it, I found almost no reference to parents at all. Are parents involved in any part of the processes that you go through, or because the children are in care, are they excluded?
it very much depends on the individual case, and we're very much led by the social worker. So sometimes parents will be, for example, at PEP meetings, and sometimes they're not involved at all. The biggest thing for us about return, and it's an interesting thing that we're talking about, especially when we're talking about bringing youngsters in from out of area, is that actually we need to be careful that we match where the youngster is at the stage of their education. So, for example, if we're looking at 16-year-olds coming back into authority, making sure that they've gone through their Year 11 wherever they currently are, and that we're looking at the transition into post-16 here. So, working very closely with colleagues in social care around the timeliness of any move when it's planned and appropriate.
We met quite a few years ago, you might not remember. We had a very detailed chat about the virtual head teacher in our virtual school. We were quite late coming into this, as I recall, and we seem to have made some good progress on it now. So how is the relationship? Every meeting I go into, we have a lot of emphasis on how much schools need to do. I know this is a virtual school, but obviously the actual physical schools are heavily involved in this. And I know that allocating and using pupil premium in schools, which is obviously different to your pupil premium plus, is challenging, and it's very time consuming for the schools as well. I just wondered what your view was on how pupil premium is being utilised for the best methods, the best ways for the children in actual schools, because that massively links into what you're doing.
In terms of schools in general and their use of pupil premium, I wouldn't know. In terms of schools' involvement in the pupil premium plus for children and young people in care, or previously looked after children. So children and young people in care, I think they're using it really well. I frequently go to head teachers meetings, designated teacher networks, and reinforce. All you have to do is ask, and if we can demonstrate how it's going to make a difference, then that will happen. I think there are sometimes some moans and groans about the system, because it's an electronic system. In some areas, not all virtual schools are the same. In some areas, the money just goes to the school, and the virtual school doesn't necessarily know what it's spent on. When Ofsted did come to Kirklees, they were pleased at the accountability, so we do know what schools are doing with that money. So whilst schools may say it's time consuming, we will work with a designated teacher. Usually what we get from schools are very positive emails and things about the support that's offered in terms of the funding and actually in terms of the joining up work that we do with other services. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions or comments? Okay, just to finish, I spoke at the beginning about the numbers and looking at the data, and I think it's just important to comment on the number of case studies that you've added into the report and the information for us to raise our awareness. And when you look at some of the outcomes, and when you look at the improvements that are made to children's lives about improving confidence, about schools and carers working more effectively together, improved attendance, the simple fact that a young person is happy and may not have been before, I think is something that we need to look at. And also looking at around being settled in that environment and also engaging in education. I think they're the positive outcomes that we need to focus on as well, and not just solely look at the figures as well. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 8 is the Kirklees Annual Educational Standards and Quality Report 2017-18. This is for the panel to consider a report on the Annual Educational Standards and Quality Report, Key Stage Education Achievement Outcomes for Kirklees Schools Academic Year. Who's taking?
Morning. Just going to talk three things really for Emma and I to share with you. One, I think, is I'd like to give a short summary, because that is 60-odd pages of data. As you know, you could spend forever looking at data. And Emma's going to go through some of the key points I'm going to raise before we come back to me just to talk about what our next steps are. So I think in summary, I would say that at Kirklees, we're doing okay in some areas, but I think the general message is that we can do a lot better. For example, the way we're going to share information with yourself is looking at our ranking amongst 152 local authorities. So where the older the children are, so at GCSE, we may well be ranking at 77 out of 152, which is very positive. As we go lower down with our younger children, sometimes in something like phonics, we're ranking at 125th out of 152. So there's some real key things we need to make sure that we do. But as you know, in terms of data, the last thing to change in a child's life is obviously that number. So there may well be some really important things going on in Kirklees at the moment that are going to make a difference. So we would just want to highlight some of those to you amongst those key stages. And Emma's going to do that little bit of work with you now, going through each of those and pulling out some of those real key messages we need to know in order to put our strategy together, which we will come back to with you in the future. Is that okay, Chair?
Good morning. As you can see, it's quite a detailed report in front of you, so I'm not going to talk you through it. You'll be pleased to know page by page, but I will pull out some of those key ideas. I'd like to first of all talk about the changes that have happened to the education qualifications over the past 3 to 5 years, because that does put a little bit of perspective on where we are as a local authority. So the new curriculum 2014 came into force for first teaching September 2014, and that was for our children from reception, well, year 1 through to year 9. The first assessment took place in summer 2016 of these new qualifications, these new curriculums at primary for the Key Stage 1 children who are aged 7 and the 11-year-olds in Key Stage 2. There isn't a formal assessment anymore at Key Stage 3. That's internally done through schools. And the next formal assessment is at Key Stage 4 when the children are 15, 16. So the Key Stage 4 assessments have changed several times since 2016, with Maths and English coming online and changing their core curriculum offer to schools, a new grading system that then came online, changing from the A to U, A to G system through to the U 1 to 9. And last year we had a further 20 curriculum subject areas at Key Stage 4, again come online, offering the new qualifications that are a much higher standard, using the new 1 to 9 grading. So the data that you can see in front of you for all of those years has changed in terms of what we're comparing to as we move from 2014-15 and 2016, and then there's been changes again in 17 and 18 at Key Stage 4. So that gave you a little bit of perspective where we're coming from. In terms of where did things start to falter, early years has been below national from 2015. Prior to 2015, we were coasting just above the national average. In 2014, match funding stopped being offered to the local authority, and what that match funding did was provide both resources but also expert training to our early years practitioners. And some of that has constituted to the drop in the standard, the expectation for our early years teachers. So currently, for early years, we're ranked in Band D, 115th out of 152 local authorities. And that's for children achieving a good level of development, which is an expectation that in 12 of the 17 curriculum areas, that broad and balanced curriculum that's offered to our reception children, they're achieving at least a grade 2. So you spoke about earlier our children in reception, not just doing the numeracy and the literacy, but developing those relationships and that enthusiasm for learning and confidence. Well, actually, in Kirklees, we do really well in that area. And it's one of the areas where we're banded B. So our young children in reception are very good in terms of self-confidence, self-awareness, managing their feelings, managing their behaviour, and managing their relationships. But those academic areas that require communication and language particularly are causing us to lag behind. And it's not necessarily just a group of learners where that's happening. It's across the board. So we're behind for boys, we're behind for girls, we're behind for pupil premium. On average, we're about 2% behind the national average in those groups. The core subject areas of writing, reading were placed in Band D, 116 out of 152 compared to other local authorities. And for number, as an overall, we're placed in Band C, 111. But the mathematics is separated up into two components, a number component and a shape, space and measure component. And the shape, space and measure, the handling, the playing, the construction aspect of it, our children do really well with. It's the actual numbers themselves, the basic counting, the one-to-one correspondence, that again is lagging behind and pulling that figure down. So from a very early start, we're behind, which means it's more difficult for our children to catch up as they move through school. And that started to filter through. So from 2015, when we dropped below the national average, that's now come through 2017, so 2 summers ago, into our Key Stage 1 results, and will be coming through in 2 years' time to our Key Stage 2. The teachers are working incredibly hard, looking at those gaps for learning, marrying them back up to the early years, and those gaps, particularly communication, language and phonics, to be able to access the curriculum through the reading, the writing, and then developing their number more. So if we move forward and look at Key Stage 1, that's when our children are now aged 7 and have their first formal assessments that are teacher assessed. So the teacher assessments are done in 3 areas. They're done in reading, writing and mathematics as a general principle. These are done in small classroom environments where the teacher makes a judgment. Children are required to sit a test, but it's the teacher assessment in which the data is reported to you through. There is also the phonics test, or the phonics check, that takes place for all children in Key Stage 1, but if for any reason a child was absent or unable to take the test in Key Stage 1, there is a reset opportunity in Key Stage 2. So the reason why I'm pulling out the phonics specifically is that our children have dropped in phonics over time. And again, it's a similar time frame when that drop took place. So around 2014, 2015, additional match funding again was withdrawn, and that phonics has impacted, because it was the same phonics funding, has impacted on the children's pass rate. So we're now approximately 2% behind for phonics. And that in itself is limiting some of our children in being able to access the curriculum because they're struggling with the reading. Okay, so Key Stage 1, it sounds doom and gloom, but actually we have made some improvements since the 2017 results. We have started to take a slight hike up, but not at the pace in which we'd hoped, and it has placed us in those bottom criteria. So over the past few years, the learning support and the schools have worked together quite intensively, and what we've been looking at with the learning team and the teachers is focusing our attention on reading. And there has been a push from local authority officers, but also our teaching schools within our local area to push reading, support reading and put additional funding in there. And that's starting to come through in the data now. As we move on to Key Stage 2, we're struggling with mathematics. So mathematics was starting to rise as an issue, as I spoke to you about at early years. It is still an issue at Key Stage 1. It was one of those areas that we didn't make an improvement upon, but at Key Stage 2, it's there. So that is a thread that's starting to run through now. That mathematics, which can be standalone criteria, is starting to have quite a large impact. And for a society where we look to STEM activities, engineering, and many of our children go into employability within those areas, that drop in mathematics is becoming a little bit of a concern for us. As we move through to Key Stage 4, whilst mathematics is currently above the national average, that isn't where we want to be. We have much higher aspirations for our children. And that mathematics core is something that, again, we want to improve at, particularly at those higher grades. So the grade 5, the grade 6, the grade 7 and above is, again, where we need to be pushing. The other areas at Key Stage 4 places us in Band C. Our figures have been above national for a reasonable length of time, back to 2012. So we've coasted at that above national. But again, it's that word coasting I'm using. The gap between us and national is closing a little bit, but we made improvements last year where nationally they didn't. The overarching figure of us being in Band C makes it feel a little bit better, but Band C isn't good enough. And when we dig deeper into our groups of learners, we've got specific children with the pupil premium, the disadvantaged children that are in Band D, are Children who are SEN support specifically are also in Band D. Our EHC children are making much better progress than their other counterparts. But again, we've got huge differences between our girls and boys. There is almost half a grade per subject difference between girls and boys in Kirklees, where girls are achieving half a grade better than the boys in each of the 8 subject areas. So that's a brief overview. I'm just going to pass you back to Harpreet to summarise what we're doing next.
Thank you. The key things we've looked at is it's very easy to look across so many bits of data and try and do everything. So at the moment we're in the process of consulting various groups and bodies about pulling out what we think are the key strands. At the moment, as you can see from the data, certainly phonics and reading is critical for our children to be immersed in language as early as they can, and continuing that work across as they get older is going to be a key part of our strategy. Similarly with mathematics, we also feel that would be a real drive, pooling resources together to make sure all our children, whatever age they are, make that big gains they need. And all the time in the strategy we're looking at is our disadvantaged young people. We need to make faster progress for them so they can get over the barriers and make up that lost ground. So that's a key focus. But in order for this to happen, I think leadership and management is critical at Kirklees, regardless of which school you go to. And leadership management means governance, leaders who are running schools, but also leaders who are at the middle leader level. They're the ones who might be running a phase or a department, that the strengthening that leadership is a key part of making this a sustainable bit of work. We also want to make sure that we reduce exclusions. That isn't there in this data at the moment, but we've got some capacity now to really dig deep and find out what are the rates of exclusion, to what extent are they similar to national averages, and who are those children who have been excluded, and how can we strengthen our process together with schools so that we reduce that number so we give them a very best start in life. So they're the real key areas we're looking at the moment. Like I said, that's going out to more consultation discussion with a whole variety of people to make sure our strategy for the next 5 years is sustainable and works.
Thank you both for that. I would be interested into finding out more of the progress with regards to the plans and aspirations that you have to reduce exclusions, and working on that for a future meeting. Can I just ask one question before opening to the panel? The girls achieving half a grade better, could you just give a little bit more detail around that?
Of course. It's particularly at Key Stage 4 when we're looking at the Progress 8. The Progress 8 is the new measure that was brought in 2017. And what that does is it looks at the attainment that each child has on an individual level against their counterparts across the nation in the 8 different subject areas that take up the Attainment 8. 2 of those buckets or pillars are from English and mathematics. There's then 3 further subjects that are included in that from the EBAC subject areas, which are the sciences, the humanities and the languages. And then there are a further 3 open pillars that allow you to do the arts, PE, ICT, or to double count English literature or English language if it wasn't taken up in the first 2 core. So that's how the progress is judged, the difference between an individual child's attainment based on their prior attainment at Key Stage 2, compared to how children nationally have done in that subject from the same starting point. So in Kirklees, for Progress 8, our girls achieve 0.64% higher than our boys, which is the half a grade per subject as an approximation. The attainment of girls in all of those subject areas is now becoming a positive. In the past, the girls were lagging behind in some subject areas. That is still the case in a few, if we look at subject level data. In the packs, you've only really got the English and Maths comparisons, the Attainment 8 and Progress 8. The subject level data is a further dig down. But that's where the difference persists. So the girls are a positive and the boys are a negative in terms of the progress. So the 0.64% difference is that girls are producing work and achieving better than their counterparts nationally, but unfortunately the boys aren't. So when we look at that all together, it brings the Progress 8 down in Kirklees down to minus 0.04.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from panel members? Deb?
When you were talking about how to improve things. You mentioned school managers. Now, I'm now speaking from personal experience. For me, the most important people are the parents. If parents are involved in their children's education, actively involved, then many problems can be avoided. I'd like to know, how can we increase the opportunity for parental involvement in children's education? What are we doing at the moment to increase parental involvement in the children's education? And again, I apologise. I don't think managers are the key. I think the parents are the key. It's too easy to say, you know, you're the head teacher, you've got to do this and this. I know from working with parents in school that if you get the parents involved, and some parents do need educating themselves. So this would be the way I would be looking for you to tell me what you're going to be able to do in that area.
I think it's really important to think about anybody in a leadership role in school, whether it's a governor or a head teacher or a middle leader. Part of the national standards are engagement with families, and to what extent are you making sure that your community is a focus? So I wouldn't say that's an additional. I think it's a very, very fair point about to what extent are we making sure that parent voice in there. And it's quite difficult, I suppose, to speak for the 100-odd schools that are in Kirklees, but I think my point too that when you go back to what the standards are for leadership, that is something that's at the heart of it. So we will be making sure that's part of the process that we do, whether we're using external support, internal, how are schools in different contexts successful, because there are lots of successful schools who do that engagement successfully. We want to share that practice.
Let's come on now, thank you. I just wanted to add to that. The research does say that actually, certainly for a child's primary stages, that parental influence is greater than school influence on learning outcomes. And I think our future learning strategy will absolutely focus on what we do then. And of course, that the first 1,000 days, the first 3 years of a child's life are the time that they learn the most. So in our future learning strategies, it comes forward, we'll look at each of those stages. But for us, it's really important that we engage parents in that very early education. They are the first educators, and they and remain so right the way through to be the biggest influence on a child's learning outcome. So any future learning strategy, we'll want to pull in our adult learning service, for instance, because they will have an absolute role in helping parents to help their children do the best that they can. So there is something about how we get everybody working together on that. This issue is not just about what the schools can do, but what we can all do. So just not just families, but the communities that those families live in as well.
I think you raise a good point there, and it is really challenging, isn't it? Because deprivation is linked here, isn't it? So you've got a demographic of people that might not have achieved it themselves at school, who find it difficult to support their children at home with their homework or their schoolwork to even understand it. And then you've got a demographic of people who increasingly, and you only need to look at what time the morning rush hour starts now, the fact that adults now are leaving early for work, getting back later, you know, when I go pick up the kids, we're quite lucky really, because my wife works part-time and I've got a bit of flexibility, but when you go on the school runs and you add up the number of days you've done it, you see an increasing number of grandparents, fortunately, that are helping with school runs, and that's telling us that, you know, mums and dads or carers are working longer days. You come home from work at 5, 6 o'clock, and the challenge is then you don't feel like helping the kids with their homework, nor do the kids really want to do it come 5, 6 o'clock. It wouldn't be right really to put them through it. So the challenge is huge really, isn't it? It's huge on a couple of different demographics of people there, and how we go about addressing that. I think we're a generation away from from addressing that really, until we can get, you know, the ones that are coming through GCSEs now, or maybe a few years ago, that are attaining higher, that then go on to have children and are able to support them. So there's that point. I just wanted a bit of clarity on the match funding that you said was withdrawn in 14, 15. I don't understand what that is.
In 2014, part of the and going back to 2012 when phonics first came into play, the DfE offered match funding to local authorities to offer training and resources to support the implementation of the phonics. And that phonics was training that was open offer to all of the schools for their Year 1 teachers, their Year 2 teachers ready for the retake, but also to the early years staff to develop the phonics through reception. So that was the match funding that I was referring to, and that came to a stop after 18 months, 24 months. It was never planned to go any longer than that, but that has had quite an impact moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I understand that now. So do we still have our funding? Because it's match funding, so I assume that meant a little bit of DfE and a little bit of our own going. Do we still specifically fund the phonics bit differently to anything else, or not?
No, sorry. When the match funding came in place, the funding that we used as a council was the money that came direct from the DfE. The match funding that I'm talking about is that then the schools supplemented that training on a 50-50 basis, rather than the government and us as the council offering that. So there is still, obviously, there is still some funding in schools for the training and CPD and development, but as we know, that funding has shrunk time on time. We are still offering the phonics training. Karen Pickles is one of our lead operators within the local authority, and she's still very busy delivering phonics training to new teachers as they come through, but also very experienced teachers that may be new to Key Stage 1, having moved from either reception up or from Key Stage 2 down. So it's still something that's happening on a regular basis, but the funding isn't there to support some of the schools.
Very much. I mean, I remember you doing my governor training on dating. Very good, by the way. A lot of what we've talked about is talking about national, benchmarking ourselves against national figures, stats, statistical neighbours. A few points. One, when we talk about girls being ahead of boys, I'm knocking on a bit now, and it was the same when I was at school. I think it probably was a bigger problem back then than it is now. I believe there's some improvement being made. That has always been there. I'm not saying that's a reason to accept it. It's not a new phenomenon. Definitely not. The other thing, when we're talking about averages, and we're pitching ourselves against national averages, which I understand we need a target. I'm a big one for numbers myself. What I think I'd be interested to hear is how we are doing in more detail, because if our 25% lowest is massively lower and it's been propped by the top 25% being massively higher, that's where I don't feel I got the numbers from this report, and that's no offence, I know that is how it's done. I think another point I was just going to think about was the match funding. Presumably other authorities that we are again pitching our numbers against have got the same challenges, and again I don't want to get into thinking that's a reason, because I probably wouldn't agree that it was. And when we talked about exclusions, it's not just exclusions, it's how many hours children are, one, not learning in class for whatever reason, but also isolations has become, you only have to start talking to parents and see what's being put on things like Facebook to see that there are thousands and thousands of teaching hours being lost to isolation, and I've never had anybody convince me that a child sat in a booth in an isolation room has got anything close to what they will be experiencing if they're in the classroom with their teacher and their peers, and they are within that lesson that they are then missing through isolation. I'm not a great fan of isolation. I can see why sometimes that's necessary, because some children will be disruptive and it's not fair to the other children in the class. But I do become a little bit concerned. I think we've maybe got into a situation where it's too acceptable to have kids in isolation. I think we've moved into, rightly so, that excluding is not acceptable. Now it's an absolute last resort. What worries me and what I've seen and heard is that maybe isolation is becoming a little bit too accepted.
Can I just come back on a couple of things that you said? I think we talked about being ambitious. We're also very keen to look outward. So I think looking for best practice and research is a really good way of addressing things like boys underachievement, to what extent exclusion's high. What we don't want to do is to just focus within Kirklees. We need to look well beyond, and we are party to quite a few national networks that we want to dip into to find out, well, what are the similar statistical neighbours, what strategies are being used to try and overcome some of those issues, so we can transfer some of those. So whilst I agree it has been around for boys, but it was only 50 years ago when it was girls, the other way around. So that has flipped almost in that time. That's my age. But I think that's really important, not to look inward and to look very much creatively and looking at the best practice and going and find it and working amongst lots of other local authorities and schools.
Yes, thank you. I think you've really answered this, but I think the match funding that was withdrawn in 2014, for me, I think that was the straw that brought the camel's back, because that was the funding that was really needed. My daughter started in 2013 to now, and she's 5 years old, and I can see in terms of the phonics and the support that's there, as a parent, you know, they have a spelling test, don't they, on a Friday, or my daughter does, and the words and the process on something as simple as like a spelling test. I mean, I have to sit down, or my wife has to sit down with at least twice a week, and I think that has impact on children from a really young age, because they're going into those tests and they're having to spell words like impossible or something like that. They get 4 out of 10 on the spelling test, and it means that parents are having to do a little bit more. But over the last, certainly from 2014 to when it was withdrawn 18 months ago, the phonics and the classroom support, you can tell it's a little bit limited. So, I mean, I think you do agree that the withdrawal of that funding has had some impact.
Whilst we can't definitely say that that was the issue, it's coincidental that it happened around the same time. There are other things that have affected the phonics, absolutely. You know, the early help that children have, the early education, the 2-year-old, 3-year-old education, the access to reading, all those other bits do contribute to it. And it's difficult to say this proportion is because there's no match funding, this proportion is because you've got an NQT who hasn't taught it before, this proportion is because you've got a large number of children in your cohort who are disadvantaged or SEN. So from a local authority point of view, it's very difficult to say that's the cringe point. It's coincidental that our drop began to happen around the time that funding was withdrawn. I can't say for definite that that's the response, and it may not. It's one of many contributing factors.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. Just one more time for me. I think my last point is just making sure, or getting some confidence that for the children that are underachieving, not achieving, and I agree with my colleague here about children that are excluded or in isolation in schools, that's always usually it's always a product of something that they've experienced either in school or at home, isn't it? They're still children. There's still something that we can help them with, and I think making sure that we link together the Community Plus offer that we've got in the community for families is joined up with the pastoral care in schools, so that everybody knows which families and which children need the right level of support, and joining those two dots together, because Community Plus is relatively new, I think is really important. I did get some information a couple of weeks ago around, are there some new health and wellbeing leads or teachers going into schools? Is there some link with Northall Paul in Murfield that's quite a new thing, so to speak?
There's quite a few new developments taking place across the board through the community hubs, and I know that Val Flintoff's been doing some work on some health and research that's been happening there. I wonder if any other colleagues?
I think it links really nicely to sort of the next item on the agenda, but you mentioned Communities Plus. I think it's sort of joining up all the resources. So with early support, the work that schools and partners are doing in the hubs, Because you're absolutely right, it's about children being ready to learn, and so being able to use data and intelligence, having a good strategy, which we would like some support with, your support in terms of helping us to get that right over the next 5 years, and that way we can target funding at the right strategies so that we get the right home to school environment.
Okay, thank you for presenting the information. There are lots of challenges ahead, and I think we'll look forward to getting additional information, especially around exclusions and how that works, and the progress that's been made, exclusions both internally and external exclusions, and what offer we have for alternative provisions as well going forward. Thank you. Item 9 is community hubs. The panel will consider a report on the development of community hubs and the accountability arrangements established for activity taking place within the hubs and across council and partner agencies.
Thank you, Chair. Michelle and Tracy and myself will take you through the report and any questions that panel may have. Important, probably just to clarify from the outset, the Kirklees community hubs were formerly known as schools as community hubs, but I think in recognition that it was a much wider partnership operating with schools, yes, but the council and health partners and others, that it was more appropriate that the entities were named Kirklees community hubs. I think it is a timely item given the discussion that we've just had. You know, the background to this is very much about schools and partners looking to operate with communities, with families beyond the school gate to improve what happens within the school gate, and to maintain that focus upon improving outcomes in the way that Harcrete and Emma have outlined. I'll just mention some brief points in the report, as will Michelle, and then obviously take any questions. So it's important to say that the community hubs, there are 17 of them across the district, that they have a defined partnership of schools together with early years, primary and secondary provision, that each hub has some form of named leadership and some element of coordination, and that they act as a vehicle for a broad range of services and partners across the statutory and community and voluntary sector to come together at a local level. It's fair to say that not all schools are active in those hubs, and that there are varying degrees of maturity and engagement across the hub network. Equally, there are different levels of service provision within the hubs and of elected member and partner engagement. There are some hubs that are absolutely at the vanguard of activity and can clearly demonstrate that they're having an impact upon system change, integrating services and better outcomes for children and families. There are others that have a journey to go on, and we're mindful that we need to prioritise those hubs so we have a degree of consistency across the system. The authority has provided strategic support for the development of the community hubs and has employed a small team, and Tracy is the head of that team. The council has been committed to working differently with schools and partners in order to make the best use of resources, and also working with children and families and communities to define and determine what those programmes may look like, putting those needs and those aspirations of communities at the heart of what takes place within the hubs. Today, there have been a number of investments made by the authority and other partners in the work of the hubs. The Kirklees Healthy Child programme has been specified and commissioned with hub leaders and is delivered through a hub infrastructure. The costs of children's centres based on school sites are being met by the authority, and activity to make those children's centres a real asset for communities is taking place. We've prototyped some activity with consultants, family support consultants being based in 2 of the hubs. That's making a real difference, a real impact upon upon children and families, and the way that schools are able to deal with more complex and challenging needs of individual pupils. Looking forward to where we are now, so item 2, section 2, the key issues, the current position. I think it's fair to say that significant progress has been made to develop that operating environment for the community hubs. Investments have been made, but there's a recognition also that with that investment comes the need for accountability and a clear understanding of what the hubs are going to do, how are they doing it, and what impacts are they having, what difference are they making. So agreement has been reached recently with hub leaders to invest in a team of 9 coordinators. Those coordinators have been recruited and will be deployed to those hubs, but crucially employed and managed by the council, bringing that consistency and with the focus upon those hubs that have the clear need to develop. A team of consultants drawn from Michelle's early support service have been appointed and will be aligned to each hub, building upon that pilot work that's taken place within Combe Valley and within the Home Firth hub. Michelle, do you want to outline the early support partnership and strategy?
Right, thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a bit of an overview in terms of where we are with the Council's early support service and that wider partnership. Just in terms of the Council's early support service, that was implemented from the 1st of April 2018, and I've actually been in post since July of 2018. We had an early support partnership launch at the end of January, which was really well attended, and with over 200 attendees from across the partnership and other agencies. So at that event, we was able to launch the new early support partnership strategy, along with the new early support single assessments and the Safeguarding Board's decision making framework. So at the event we was also able to showcase some of the new, the revised services and some of the new services which came from the Department of Education's Innovation funding. Those included the multi-systemic therapy team, which are more known to us as MST. So that team is now up and running and actively taking cases, and up to date they are being overwhelmed with cases as well. We also had the expanded family group conferencing, and since they've expanded they've supported over 100 families in terms of developing their plans. We've also got the expanded family mental health service, and they support practitioners across services to understand and support families where there may be mental health impacting on the wider family. Just going back to the early support partnership, for anybody who didn't manage to get to the launch, we do have some videos of all the presentations which are on YouTube, which I don't know if we're able to send the link out with the minutes from the meeting. We can share those.
Thank you, Michelle. So, yeah, just briefly to finish off, I think it's important to note that the accountability framework that has been developed with the hubs has a kind of multi-dimensional element to it. The key element is that at the individual hub level, that they have delivery plans in place and management structures with elected members engaged consistently within those structures, working alongside GPs, community champions and other parts of the system to have really robust plans that reflect local need. The hub leader network themselves have identified 4 key areas that are consistent, common across the system that they want to have impact upon, those being strong emotional health and well-being, confident speech and language, the best start in life, and also work around basic needs and securities so that particularly young people are able to attend school in the right frame for learning, that their basic needs and securities are being met. I think I'll leave it there at that point, and happy to take questions.
Very good to hear about the launch in January. And I know it's very early days, but I think we could do with whatever data might appear to be able to show that the early support strategy is actually being effective.
You're right, it is quite early days, and we're just the start of that early support journey. So we are just looking at the data sets. So we should quite soon be able to bring some data to a future meeting.
Thanks. I think it's really positive, the fact that we've got, although I'm not sure I like the choice of words, the consultants working with the hubs. I think the fact that we've got that many earmarked and already funded is really positive, and I can see a role for those going forward as well. I think, just in case you haven't read between the lines, I think my hope is that, correct me if I'm wrong if this isn't their remit, but my hope is that, yes, they do, with an ever-increasing list on the CAM service, that they do some work at trying to provide or link together the right services for the right children, the right families, because they are really worthwhile. It is a lot of money. There definitely is a gap, but there's definitely some work that can be done with a lot of children, the ones that are excluded, the ones that are in inclusion, the ones that are displayed as non-attendance, because we all know that just because you're not attending in schools, it's not necessarily the child's fault that they're not attending, it's usually somebody else's fault that they're not attending. I was shocked. I work in Leeds. I was shocked when we offered, I work at a community centre, we offered a school a Christmas activity last year, and they said what they'd do was they'd send the children with the greatest attendance, and I was a bit surprised, and being from the community, we had to say to them, that's not our remit, that, you know, what you need to do is send us the children who need rewarding, that wouldn't necessarily get rewarded, that aren't achieving. They did, which is great, and I think that's the ethos that I want us to move forward here, that a lot of children are, you know, they're either struggling at school with achievement because their neurology hasn't developed or matured enough. Some kids are going through a tough time at home. Some kids might be being bullied at school. And that's the reason that they're underachieving, they're being expelled, they're being excluded, and they are what, in historical terms, people might have called them acting up. And most of them aren't acting up, they're just products of whatever they've been witnessing or hearing or seeing for a good number of months and years. And I think the therapy angle to this and behaviour angle to this is really important.
So I'll respond to the role of the consultant and hopefully what they're setting out to achieve. I think Tracy has some case studies that potentially, you know, answer some of the issues around that underachievement, and now the hubs can help to address some of that. So in terms of the consultants, they're very much taking that whole family approach, that you know, joining up services. So whether it's mental health, whether it's drug and alcohol issues, whether it's housing, whether it's debt advice, whether it's issues of out of work, whether it's matters relating to attendance of the child, that they're able to join up those services for that family. And what we do have in place is that consultant role within a whole lot of different services, not just based within schools as well, so they're able to call upon that expertise and to address the whole needs of the family, not just necessarily the presenting issue that child may come to school with. And I think certainly in the case of one of the consultants and a couple of the hubs, they were very, very clearly be able to identify their impact they're having in terms of reducing demand, the numbers of children in need coming down, the numbers of children on child protection plans coming down, the numbers of referrals into specialist services coming down, because they're better able to deal with some of those quite complex but not necessarily issues that require a referral to the front door. And you know, we're hoping that all the hubs can get into that space where they're able to demonstrate that impact.
Can I just come back very quickly in the way they said I'm not sure about the term consultant. The other thing that I'd like to see is it's done softly, because there's nothing worse for some children to have to know that they're getting like extra support or extra care or extra attention, because you can bet your bottom dollar that some of the other children in that school will make an issue of letting people know, or the other children in that playground know, that there's something not quite right. You know, they're an unusual creature, 4, 5, 6 or 7-year-olds out there, but it does happen. So I think this kind of work, really valuable, but within school, just should be softly, shouldn't it?
I think you're right. It's not necessarily how you know what you do; it's the way that you do it, and those skills are vital. Absolutely.
Before I say what I'm going to say, I'm going to say what I believe about every child, and I believe every child matters. And the reason I'm speaking now is that I think we need to be incredibly careful that we don't go down the route of only seeing children who have got issues, children who have needs. We need to look at all children. I'm just picking up on some comments that have just been made. I have an experience with my own daughter where a child who was naughty a lot of the time, as they would say, got lots of rewards for very tiny things that were below what was expected. And my own daughter was then very upset because she got nothing and she was always good. So I think we need to be careful we don't end up tipping balance on some of the stuff that we are doing, and that I hope I'm explaining this right, that, you know, we keep our eye on all the children so that we're not too focused on the ones who need intervention and help, and we keep an eye on them all, that the ones who have always not had problems don't tip over. And sometimes I sit and listen to things and it makes me wonder whether, you know, we kind of take our eye off the ball sometimes. And I'm just making that point out of a very caring thing I'm saying, because it literally is every child matters. And in these days of early intervention and prevention, that matters too. Okay, I just needed to say that, because we are all here for the good of all the children, aren't we?
Thank you. Just on, these hubs have been going now for quite a while. And I have a thing about these hubs, because I know there's one in the Colne Valley. I know absolutely nothing about it. I have no involvement whatsoever. And the thing is, I don't think a lot of people in the Colne Valley know anything about it neither, because I've mentioned it to residents and sort of people that have got children in school and stuff. Said, well, you know, that I've got problems, you know, have you spoken to the school about the hub and this, that and the other? And they'll go, what hub? So is things going to happen, you know, where more people are going to know about it? Because like I say, I know very little about it. I know there's one that we've had that's come to improvement panel that seems to be doing great things, but I think others we know nothing about, and there's a lot of elected members that aren't involved and know nothing about the hubs that are in their areas.
If I can, sorry, before you comment on that, I'd just like to follow up on the comments that are just made. From my personal experience, it hasn't been a positive one with community hubs. I remember, well, I knew nothing to begin with. I knew it was taking place, and then I realised quite quickly there's a lot of duplication of work. There was a meeting set up with me and a coordinator. The coordinator didn't want to involve. The elected members didn't see how elected members could contribute or should be invited to meetings. I was invited to meetings, although I had police and local agencies, local partners saying to me, why aren't you turning up to these meetings? Never received an invite, never asked. When I questioned it, they just didn't see the need for elected members. So I question, when you've got elected members in here who are supposed to be at the heart of this organisation and at the heart of the communities in which we serve, that there seems to be, not all instances, but perhaps some, where we were absolutely ignored and not brought forward and not being brought together to be involved in this, where we know an awful lot of what's going on and not involved at any level whatsoever. And then to see the duplication of work and to see us working on very similar strands and different issues is very disappointing.
I think the report acknowledges that frustration and that lack of consistency. There have certainly been instances where elected members have been actively discouraged from being involved, and that's not acceptable. The report identifies that the coordinators that will now be put in place, so not what happened previously, but from now on, will be employed by the local authority, will be clearly briefed that the role of elected members is to be at the heart of those hub arrangements in the future, and that all elected members are engaged in those hubs as a matter of course. We've also, as well as the accountability framework, been working on a communication strategy, because I accept that understanding, that common understanding has not been there. We will absolutely work to address that and put that in place, whether it's at elected member level, whether it's children and families living within a certain community. I think certainly some hubs are more developed than others, and therefore awareness will be higher in some areas. But the work of the next 12 months is to get that consistency and that shared understanding.
Okay, thank you. I think it will be good to see what happens going forward, and I acknowledge that not all hubs are as strong as others. I think it's important that we get this right. It's vitally important the work and the difference that this can make to our communities, and we need to be involved with that at every level where possible. Okay, thank you. Yes, quick one.
Who do all the people at 3.5 work for? Who are they going to be reporting to and evidencing their input? Does anybody know that?
Sorry, I didn't catch the first bit.
Who are the people who will be employed under point 3.5?
So they're the coordinators.
Like 1.3 million of people.
Yeah, so they're a combination of the 9 coordinators that have recently been appointed, and the consultants that are enrolled. They're employed by the local authority. They report to Michelle. They're within Michelle's early support service.
Okay, thank you for that. Item 10 is Children's Scrutiny Panel Work Programme and Agenda Plan. That's on page 143. You can see the work programme and plan for forthcoming meetings. Item 11 is future meetings. The next meeting will take place on the 1st of April. No, it won't.
Recently arranged a meeting on the 18th of March.
18th of March.
That's an additional one.
That's the additional one. You okay with that? Thank you very much for those who've attended this part. That concludes the formal part of the agenda, and we'll move on to the informal part.